Welcome to Corwin's Leaders Coaching Leaders podcast with hosts Peter Dewitt and Michael Nelson. This podcast is from education leaders for education leaders. Every week, Peter, Mike, and our guests get together to share ideas, put research into practice, and ensure that every student is learning not by chance, but by design.
All right, Michael Nelson, welcome to the Leaders Coaching Leaders podcast.
Peter Dewitt, welcome to Leaders Coaching Leaders podcast.
We've decided that the first episode we're going to interview each other, and that doesn't feel odd at all.
Nope, not at all.
Not at all. But here we are. We're in Melbourne, Australia.
Yeah.
As we're recording this, we've been facilitating workshops here. We're going to be going to Sydney and Perth. We were in Canada about a week and a half ago. This is a pretty new experience for you because you had been a superintendent. And then you were at WASA, the Washington Association of School Administrators, where you put on a lot of conferences. You created the Instructional Leadership Network, all of these things, but now you are the facilitator and author. How's this feeling?
I would say the word surreal is how it feels right now. But, what I can tell you, Peter, is that the book, our new book, Leading with Intention, really has come alive during this time of travel and time of meeting people from all across the world. And what I mean by that is we focus on human interconnectedness in our book. And we talk a lot about, authenticity and realness. And in the book, we highlight Guy Winch's research on genuineness. And that has really resonated with our participants from many countries and across the United States in the last 2 or 3 months, as we've been doing lots of traveling and lots of workshops. And what I can say is, having been gone through the system from teacher to principal to district curriculum director and then superintendent, and then into the state level work in Washington State, this broadening of experience and meeting educators from all around the world, there's a united message that there's a lot of individuals who chose to go into the field of education that really care and that are genuinely doing all they can to support students. And I don't know how you and I can spread that message, but that's a message that I would love to share in much more globally of this. We are not silos of, grade levels or silos of countries. We're united around supporting students, and that feels good. And it for me, and I know we wrote the chapter before we did this travel, but for me, chapter 2 of the book, which is human interconnectedness, has really come alive.
I think one of the things that I think about when you're actually talking about that is the audiences that the educators we've been able to work with. I feel like they genuinely want to be there.
There you go. You're using the word genuine.
Yeah, they need to understand why they're there, because they don't always know why they're in the room. But I feel like when we start, they genuinely want to be there. And here's the thing that I think is, I guess, a question that I want to ask about when we're talking about things like leading with intention. We're also focusing on what we've referred to often, and it's been referred before us, to the learner's mindset. Like, we're in Melbourne, we're going to be in Sydney and Perth, we're in Canada, we're in the US, whatever. But we have a learner's mindset. When we're going into these facilitating of workshops, we are not going in feeling like we're the experts. We're going in asking questions because many of the people that are in the room understand their context, obviously, better than we do. So for you and me, I feel like facilitating workshops or even leading with intention in general is about going in with that learner's mindset to ask questions that you're deeply interested in, but at the same time, you're feeling like you're developing the expertise together within the room. Does that make sense? Like, does that feel to you like what we're trying to do too?
It does. And that goes back to the genuine statement and what I feel, how I might answer or how I might share a little bit of information around that subject is, you and I have had pretty incredible experiences. You and I have been blessed as educators.
Mhm.
And when you are blessed, I feel like my little bit of my faith maybe was coming out. When you're blessed, you have almost this obligation to share and to spread some of that wealth that you've been given.
Mhm.
And we have been blessed in our careers and have had different experiences. And so when we engage with our participants and our people that are come to our workshops, we share a little bit from our experiences, not from you need to do it this way, from the perspective of here's some experiences. And then, like you said, we generate questions, we move into protocols of how might we engage and make it better. And we have interviewed in the season that our viewers are going to experience. We've already done some of the podcasts, and you're going to hear a common thread of the word student and a
Mhm.
common thread of the word learning and learner over and over and over again. And I think through our experiences and how we design the workshops and the blessings that we've been given, it moves the participants forward. And so there's this immediate appeal to the head and heart. And very quickly, I don't know about you, but I feel like our participants quickly become really good friends and colleagues
Mm.
right away.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that that connection is really important when it happens. You're right about the blessed part. You know, when I became a teacher, I mean, my family talked about it like I was just, it was the most amazing experience that, you know, I was able to be a teacher for 11 years. You know, we talk so much about, and one of the worldwide issues we're focusing on that comes up everywhere is teacher attrition. You know, people are leaving the profession. That kind of baffles my mind just because of the fact that when I was a teacher for 11 years, I felt very fortunate to be a teacher. And I learned so much that I didn't necessarily get in the pre-service teaching program.
Mhm.
I certainly got it from the cooperating teachers that I had. So I felt very blessed, to use your word, to do that. And then when I became a teacher, I had a special ed teacher that I was working with, a speech pathologist. Like we learned together, and I felt like I learned from them. Every day was kind of this master class.
Mhm.
I don't know if everybody's getting that experience. So
Right.
when we're talking about, you know, one of the big issues that comes up quite a bit as well, besides teacher attrition, is that of tier one instruction.
Right.
And I felt like I was exposed to tier one instruction all the time, both as a student teacher, but also in my role as a teacher. And I learned it from co-teaching with a special ed teacher. I don't feel like everybody gets that experience.
Right.
How is it that we are at the age that we are and we're not disgruntled by being in education? We actually feel grateful to be in education. And I get it. You know, some people will say, well, Peter, you did leave. No, I didn't. I went from teaching for 11 years to being a principal for 8 years, still in lots of schools, still doing a lot of coaching. But education in itself, I
Mhm.
feel very blessed to have been an educator. How is it that you keep that going? Because I think that's a really important, I know we weren't prepared to ask each other this question, but it came up in the conversation. What would you say to people who are in education that don't always feel so blessed?
Mhm.
How do you maintain that? Because you really do. If people know you, you really, whether you were a teacher or building leader, district leader, you were superintendent for 14 years, which these days is unheard of. How have you kept that gratitude?
I feel like for our audience, I want to turn the table on this one.
But you're going to answer my question first
Okay.
because you're not going to turn the table.
Okay. All right, but I'm going to turn the table after I answer the question.
Let's go
So
with that.
I think it goes back to that learner's mindset of John in the last episode of our last season talked about it wasn't until the 2000 or the early 2000 that we as educators can have taken upon ourselves to investigate and study research ourselves. That before that time, it was you would do your programs, and once you were done with your program, you felt like you were done. But we wouldn't necessarily, educators before that time wouldn't necessarily chew into or get really deep into that research piece. And John says after that,
Patty, you're talking about. I just want to be clear.
my friend John,
Yeah, exactly.
it really talked about that as a huge shift, and that he believes in the future we will recognize that as a shift, and over time culturally that will fundamentally change who we are, because I don't think there's teachers, principals, superintendents, educational leaders that aren't constantly and continually reading research. And I think that that fills me. That fills me when I read about the great work of others and how they have made huge gains, and I want to study that, and I want to ask questions, and that I become inquisitive myself. That is intriguing to me. But my flip,
Oh,
so
here we go.
but my flip on that is, you talk about, and John talked about that research, you had a pivotal moment in your life. You weren't necessarily a learner. And there seemed to be, and I don't know for our audience if they've truly have heard your story about, there was a pivotal moment when you moved from Peter DeWitt, a nice guy, but not necessarily a high performing student, to Peter DeWitt, I'm a learner and I'm going to take on learning for the rest of my life.
You're being very kind. There was. And I think it was a pivotal moment. That's a really interesting way to say it too, because I think as soon as it clicked, I just kept going. I was retained in 4th grade. And then my dad died when I was in 5th, and my mom went back to get her GED when I was in 6th grade. And I remember always feeling older, because people knew when your birthday was. And, and then people would say kids in class would ask you how old you were, and you told them, and they, as kids looking at you saying, well, why are you a year older than me? And you have to say, well, and back then we would just be pretty blunt. I failed 4th grade. That's what we said. When I got to the point where, I was a runner my senior year of high school, and then my coaches just kept saying, come on, do it. Like, you've got to graduate from high school. That's how low the bar was. I mean, it really was. I graduated with a 66 average, and 65 was passing. And I was 4th from last in my class. I went to community college thinking I was going to change things, but I was only going because my friends were going. And then I went to another community college. My sister Trish was working there. And then I dropped out of that one. And then I was really in this position I was at that crossroads, which, sounds pretty cliche, but I was. And I really had the choice of, am I going to go work, somewhere where I was growing up, with a high school diploma, which is fine if that's what people want to do, or do I need to give school one last chance? And my sister Trish, who was National Honor Society, but she dropped out of college to help take care of me because she graduated a couple of months after my dad died. She just said, I need you to get a 2-year degree. So when I went to Hudson Valley Community College, my coach said, you're not going to be a professional runner. You need to go into the Learning Assistance Center. And I think I was ready. I know we met with my friend Annie last night in Melbourne, and I've known Annie since I was about 22, when I was actually a student at that community college. But even then, I still felt older, because I was 22 and I was at a community college. That's when most kids are graduating from college, and I was starting. And I went from a 1.7 GPA to a 3.86. As soon as I started to get that level of success, it's like self-efficacy. As soon as I built that confidence, I didn't want to let it go. Like, I got an A for the first time, and it just kept going. And I think that I've held on to that since. I went into being an elementary school teacher. I loved being an elementary school teacher. I ended up going back to get my degree in administration. I had a master's in ed psych, thinking I was done with school, and that was 1999, so right around where John was talking. And then I ended up going back, and I was an adjunct at the school where I was actually getting my administration degree at the same time that I was teaching during the day. That was like an amazing experience. I remember looking back at that. I felt so fortunate. But every time I also had that family support. You know what I mean? Like my mom, my sister, they were always so very supportive of everything that I was doing. So that sense of pride was important as well. But I worked with people who were teachers and their parents didn't treat them the same way. It was, don't you want to be more than a teacher? And it's like you and I had opposite experiences growing up in the way that you had both your parents, you were a really good student. But a similar experience that you and I had is that your mom always said that education was the noblest of professions.
Correct.
And
Yes.
my mom didn't say it that way. But as soon as I became a teacher, everybody she met, she would say, this is Peter. This is my youngest son, Peter. He's the teacher. So that part, I think that sense of pride may have actually instilled part of this in as well. And I think to bring it back to the leading with intention piece, I wonder if those moments, those pivotal moments back then, set us on a different course to just always make sure that we were giving back to the profession that we were getting so much from. And I know that to some people that might sound corny, but it is that servant leadership that Robert Greenleaf always talked about as well.
Thank you for sharing the story. I
Yeah.
think that story in itself is worth the whole podcast. I wholeheartedly feel that way. But as I think about your story in terms of the book, and I can't help but think about just your self-awareness and both internal and external self-awareness, which we talk a lot about within our book Leading with Intention. And I've heard you describe others' feeling of you, your perception was, oh, you're a Dewitt. You're not going to perform at high levels. So, it's okay that
you're in
you're
West Glens Falls, you're like all that stuff.
and so dive into thought processes of why did, I'm going to say you, but why did we include self-awareness, both internal and external self-awareness, and into the book?
I don't know. I think sometimes it happens by accident. I'd hate to say it that way, but we learn so much by facilitating workshops. Like when I go in coaching, when I go into facilitating workshops, like I'm there to learn. I mean, I need to learn, or else it's not going to be. I don't want to be the show. I had a cooperating teacher a long time ago that said, "You're not the show. They are the show, the students." So that kind of changed my mindset too. And so going into those sessions, you're always like, what questions can I ask that I'm going to actually learn from, as opposed to I'm going to ask questions that I already know the answer to, and I'm going to get through this day. What I think for me led to us having the discussion about self-awareness is that we were in these workshops, both individually or together, and a variety of conversations are happening. There are people that are in the session who don't know why they're there. I mean, they're going to be, and we do a hybrid approach where there's multiple sessions, and you've got these people coming up like, oh, I'm here. That to me is frightening. And then also the conversations that you have with leaders who are going to conferences, and they have this, this literacy issue back at school, and they're going to a literacy conference. And when you ask them why they're going, they say the district is telling us we have to. It's like, no, wait a second. How do you not have that self-awareness?
So, but don't you feel like in your pivotal moment, take back to yourself of your 22-year-old, all of a sudden you gain purpose, you gain understanding of why you were there.
I did.
In a different sense.
But one of the things that's interesting about the self-awareness piece, because this comes up, it just came up yesterday, it came up the day before when we were running workshops, is that, yes, I think it's contextual. Because at that moment, I started to become much more self-aware internally, and externally, I, was getting a greater understanding of how people felt about me. But where that cycle is always interesting is that as soon as that bug kind of bit me, and I went back to get my second master's, I went back to get my doctorate. Sometimes you can become so determined and focused. You're eternally self-aware about why you're doing what you're doing, but you're not externally self-aware about what that driven purpose is doing to everybody else. And I think that's where, for me, the role of meditation has come in, the role of being a coach. It's finding that balance to be able to say, yes, I'm driven to go after this problem that we're trying to solve. But at the same time, I need to back up a little bit and be open to asking questions to understand externally what's happening. And that's one of the reasons why I enjoy working with you so much, because you will ask me questions to slow me down that I don't necessarily always get asked. And then I have to start thinking about, why am I kind of moving in this direction?
Sure.
And that's where the leading, so I think that just all of that was probably a really huge answer, but the reality is all of those conversations, both in workshops and coaching, and you and I, that has led me, that for me, led me to think more about the internal and external self-awareness, and where does it kind of intersect with trust. So I want to ask you, because you're like flipping this on me, you are really good. I just realized I feel like I should be on a couch and like just paying you money at the end, because I go, oh my gosh.
Before you shift,
See, you won't even let me do it now.
I know we wrote the chapter on self-awareness, but the more we work and engage, as you open the show with, yes, we're in Melbourne right now and it's beautiful and it's an amazing city and the educators are incredible. The more we study and talk and have conversations about self-awareness, it particularly external. I think people realize self-awareness is internal, but the external piece and what that means, and it's pretty deep conversation and could really shift culture within, schools and staff members and students as well.
Okay,
I'm
gonna flip it out on you now. So in the
here we go.
In the book, we talk about we talk about self-awareness. We talk about human interconnectedness. And I've always, in the books that I've written on my own, I've always had kind of reflection points, and I've had vignettes and that kind of thing. But you were really, as soon as you started to get used to the process, and but get over the oh my gosh, I'm imposter syndrome writing this book and stuff. It was very important for you to not just share your story, but make sure that the readers had the opportunity to share theirs. Why?
There's a phrase that whoever's doing the talking is doing the learning. And for me, I likened that to a reader. So, if you're reading the book, the author really is doing the talking. And in our case, the authors. And how do we engage with the reader that they are an active participant and a writer within the book? And so for us, as we started to talk through this, a couple things. One was, having been a principal and superintendent for a pretty long tenure, always trying to find pieces of information that I could use with staff and immediately in staff meetings. And so we designed lots of bits of research that can stand alone, but also interconnect. And so, you can imagine protocols and where you could put the same piece of text out with all of your staff members, or you could put several pieces of text out that really connect. And so we have that, we have stories, but there's also the connection with the author. And some people may look at it and go and see the pauses in the book and say, oh, it's a workbook. But just as we have said, human interconnectedness is not relationships, it's much deeper. We believe it's not a workbook, but it's engaging the reader to become the author. And so we have coined the term, when you, let's not say if, but when you pick up our book and you engage in reading with it, you engage as the third author. So going through the book and doing the pauses and the reflections and sharing your own stories, by the end of your time with this piece of text, you become the third author, a one-of-a-kind Leading with Intention book authored by Peter DeWitt, Michael Nelson, and your name, fill in the blank.
I really like that. And one of the things that we talked about within the book is collective leader efficacy. So I've explored that before, but when we were actually thinking of the definition, we talked about the fact that it's developing when a leadership team, whether it's at the district or the building, is developing a shared understanding, and they're engaging in joint work, and they're evaluating their impact. Because as you talked about Hattie before, that's something John is always focused on. It's not just how we teach, it's what our idea of impact actually is and looks like. So those are very important questions. So as we're facilitating workshops, we're taking Leading with Intention, but you had the idea of, could we just break it down to a really simple part? Because sometimes it's too researchy. We say collective leader efficacy and people are like, oh my gosh, that's just overwhelming. But when we break it down and say shared understanding, joint work, evaluating impact, those are really important pieces. How did you, as a building leader, as a district leader, how did you develop a shared understanding? Because I know it's something you did.
I'm going to start not where you want me to start, but
of course.
We did break the definition down because we want there to be shared understanding about the definition of collective leader efficacy in terms of shared understanding, joint work, impact. But there's a game that you always there's a phrase that you say after you say the word. So shared understanding for the purpose of student and staff learning.
Yes. Yeah.
Joint work for the purpose of student and staff learning.
Yeah.
Impact for the purpose. So you can't forget that phrase of the definition. But we've highlighted those three pieces. Shared understanding, to me, that is at the core of building a strong contingency and initiative of all stakeholders to move the work forward. And as superintendent, I felt a heavy responsibility to do that and to do that well. And in a variety of ways, because I wanted to set the students up for ultimate success as well as the staff. And I usually say students to staff in that order, because that's just what is important to me. And so, to answer your question, I did a lot of writing. So I wrote to staff every single Sunday night, and I attended. You and I share some work by Vivian Robinson, and in terms of being able, do you fully not only attend but participate in the staff development? And so if I'm in a staff development that Sunday, I'm going to be talking about that and the impact of that staff development that would have with students and staff as a result of doing that. Each and every letter that I've written over the 14 years, every Sunday to staff, built that shared understanding. That's just one simple example that I'll share.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we're doing these days, and we talk about it in the book as well, is that we always send out a pre-engagement letter to participants. Sometimes we're able to do it when it's even a keynote, but we're able to send out a pre-engagement letter. We give them our success criteria. We ask them during the session, what are questions you have based on our success criteria. So we're trying to use these things to actually help develop that shared understanding. We even have in our workshops, facilitating the agenda, where we break it down and say, so we developed success criteria and ask you to share your questions. How often do you do that in your meetings? I often think that we have a common language, but we don't have a common understanding. Even here in Australia, they're dropping acronyms. There are these different roles. We could be in the US, the same thing is happening. We don't often take the time to stop and ask, so I heard you talking about student engagement. What does that look like in your classroom, or what does that look like in your school? So the shared understanding part is very important. And the joint work is interesting too, because I guess the term that I've used lately that seems to work is and they want us to use it tomorrow when we're running our next workshop, is I've often felt that collective leader efficacy means when I'm walking into a meeting with one idea and I walk out with a better one. Now, that also means we have to focus on the impact and all of that too. It's not just the good feeling of, oh, I walked out with a new idea. It's I walked out with a better idea that I'm going to use, and I'm going to understand the impact of using it. So I think those are ways that both we're leading with intention, but also with the way we're facilitating workshops, we kind of engage in that joint work. And let's be honest, I mean, you and I will sometimes miscommunicate. Actually, in one of our episodes, we have Vivian Robinson, who said that we don't have a shared understanding, we have a shared misunderstanding, which I thought was a wonderful thing that she said. But that joint work is not always easy.
Correct.
It takes some clarification to get there. It takes that relationship piece, that human interconnectedness, to be able to say we need to get past this misunderstanding and figure out how to do the work. And that's where teams don't do well, because they get hurt and then they go their separate ways and they get upset, and there's ego involved and all that stuff. And for collective leader efficacy, that joint work to really happen, we need to kind of try our best to suspend that ego and to know that it doesn't always have to be about our idea. And if somebody questions what we're asking, just as long as they do it respectfully, that we can challenge each other's thinking, and that's okay, because that's what we do.
Right.
I mean, behind the scenes, you and I challenge each other's thinking, and that's okay to be able to do, because we have the relationship to be able to do that. So what I'd like to end with, because I know we have to wrap it up pretty soon, we have a pretty phenomenal season. Now, we are the first episode, we know that, but it doesn't mean that we necessarily recorded in that way. So, we have interviewed Tom Gusky, that I think is just, interviewing Tom is always a masterclass. He's phenomenal to talk to. We've interviewed Zaretta Hammond. You loved the fact that whenever we asked her questions, she was focusing on the students. We both had the honor to interview Lauren Long, one of my favorite children's book authors and illustrators. And he is just, the books that his illustrations are great. Even in the podcast interview, I said I have two of his original prints up on my wall in my office, and you got a chance to read to him because he asked you to read. I was very jealous. Vivian Robinson, we just recently interviewed her because we're here in Australia. She's in Auckland, and the time difference definitely worked out really well. We have a pretty awesome season.
We do.
That is, I almost feel unworthy that I'm part of the first episode. I hate to say it that way. But we have that was not a good selling point, was it? But we have a pretty phenomenal season.
It's a great season, and it's only going to get better from there. So, and we have people that we are in contact with beyond the ones that Peter has mentioned, and we are just excited for this season. And we just thank you, really. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for hearing our story about leading with intention and our journey of working together, number one, but also writing the book and sharing a little bit about behind the scenes of how did we get to that research. And even though the book is written, our participants, when we go out and share, help to change our thinking, help to enrich our thinking is probably a better way of saying it, enrich our thinking to make it even better. And so just as you, as audience members, thank you for being here. And if at any point you have feedback for us, we would love to hear it.
Well, and I also, one of the important parts that you just mentioned too, besides thanking the audience, of course, is that we're always learning. So even though we wrote the book, that learner's mindset's still there, because we're never closed down to the learning that we do. And that's what makes education so exciting. So, Michael, thanks for being a host on Leaders Coaching Leaders Podcast.
Always a pleasure to work with you, Peter.
You better say that as we wrap it up.
Signing off from Australia.
That's right.